Hi and welcome to this Mjolnir build guide preview. I must admit that this is still some kind of work in progress and some things may change. However, so far this build was performing well enough and it's really promising, at least in the terms of damage output. Damage output is something, at least for me, that it's still not enough for any Mjolnir build out there, including some of my own designs. Simply because recent changes to the game greatly improved HP pools for many bosses, and especially those from the endgame. When you look at the old Mjolnir builds from many years before, they weren't really doing much damage per each discharge or arc trigger. However, they were able to trigger those spells really often. If I am not mistaken, at the beginning Mjolnir didn't have any cooldown at all. Only thing that was limiting the number of triggers was the number of hits with melee weapon. And most of the time, in that period of time, in 2.0, 2.2 and well before that, back to 1.1 when the Mjolnir was introduced to the game, most of the builds were using Molten Strike with multi-strike and faster attacks at about 5.6 to 5.7 APS with GMP to generate as many hits as possible, and this allowed for about 15 to 16 casts of discharge and arc at the same time, 30 to 32 casts per second. So when I looked back at those builds, I was thinking to myself, is it possible now in the current state of the game to push those triggers up to at least half of those 30 casts per second? And yes, it is. So what do we have here? Well, basically this is a double triggered Mjolnir setup. I mean double. One spell is triggered by Mjolnir and the second spell is triggered by custom critical strike. Now, the main issue here was to be able to boost Cyclone or melee critical strike chance high enough to make this work, because, you know, spell that is socketed in Mjolnir will be triggered on basically every melee hit. However, custom critical will only fire supported spell when that hit is critical strike hit, right? So, well, the first choice, obvious choice for any critical strike build is Assassin, because Assassin has lots of critical strike chance nodes here in his ascendancy tree. But what is more important is this guy here. It gives +2 base critical strike chance to everything. I mean everything, spells and melee attacks. However, this only works when we are at full power charges. And to be able to be at full power charges most of the time with discharge, which consumes power charges, it's a tricky thing. And well, I managed to do this by including several mechanics here. First of all, the build uses Volt's Protector, and this is pretty much mandatory chest for any, you know, power charge generating build via critical strikes, because it grants power charge for every single hit of everything that crits. This is way better than power charge on critical support gem, for example, which grants only power charges for each skill cast. So basically, if you cast Firestorm, the power charge on critical strike support gem will only grant you 1 power charge per entire Firestorm duration, while this chest will grant you as many power charges, as many critical strike that Firestorm will hit. So this is the first step to ensure each discharge will go off with as many power charges as possible. Second step here is Inaya's Epiphany, or Epiphany, I don't know how to read this correctly anyway. Because each event that generates power charges, in this case Volt's Protector, basically on every critical hit we have an event that grants us a power charge, and each of those events have 25% to gain up to maximum number of power charges instead of just 1. So if our melee attack hits fast, if our spells hit fast, we are generating many hit events, and if our critical strike chance both for melee attacks and spells is high enough, we will also generating many events that potentially grant us power charges, and each one of those events will now have a 25% chance to gain us maximum number of power charges. This is really important stuff. And now the last step, which is the most expensive but also I think the most worth enchantment for this kind of build, is 30% chance for discharge to deal damage without removing charges. This build doesn't utilize Romira's Banquet Ring, so the only way to lose power charges is by discharging them. And if we have 30% chance for our discharge to not remove those power charges, well, basically we are increasing our chance to stay at maximum power charges each discharge. So that's that. Volt's Devotion, I think most of you know how it works. It will just generate as many endurance charges, as many power charges were consumed by each discharge or lost on any other way. Now, the tricky part. Mjolnir has only 5% base crit chance, so now with this one here it has 7% if we are able to stay at full power charges. And also this little guy here will add another almost 2%, and well, if you have level 21 increased critical strike chance support, it will be exactly 2%. So we are staying now at almost 9% base, almost. The last thing here to increase this low base critical strike chance for Mjolnir is this kind of corruption on the gloves. I don't know how expensive it is now on standard or in the temp league. However, it is not as important, but it is good to have, and it can randomize between 0 something to +1, I believe. So the higher you have, the more value it will provide. All in all, from base 5% melee critical strike chance, we are able to reach about 9.5 or higher depending on the role of that corruption. And this is quite significant when boosting this stat, this base critical strike chance, by global critical strike chance increases and melee critical strike chance increases, because we don't need as much to reach a desired value. And what is a desired value for this to work, to fire this second spell, which is Arc, in the chest as often as possible? Well, I would say about 60% melee critical strike chance with Mjolnir before any power charges. 65, 70, that I think is max what you can achieve with this build, with this tree, with these items, with this kind of enchantment and corruptions. However, anything between 60, 65 is really good enough, because each power charge will increase this critical strike chance significantly, and when you are at full power charges, this one here will kick in, and you will be basically almost capped on melee critical strike chance. In my case, I am currently reaching about 94, 96 melee critical strike chance with the Mjolnir when I am at full power charges, which means I am firing this second spell, Arc, via custom critical strike as often as I can. Critical strike chance, melee critical strike chance, is not important at all for discharge being triggered by Mjolnir, because it will trigger on every hit, on every melee hit. Doesn't matter if it's a critical strike or not. So that's that. In summary, you know, boosting the melee critical strike chance is really only boosting the amount of casts via custom critical strike. Sorry, your supporting spell will be more often triggered than not. And this is not as maybe important, but it is good to have, because first of all, Arc or any other spell on its own will do a decent damage, especially Arc, because Arc has a 50% more damage for each remaining chain, so it will be good versus packs and good versus single target as well. And Mjolnir will also provide this skill chain +1 times for Arc, so basically Mjolnir is adding another 15% more damage to Arc. So this second spell will be doing nice damage on its own, but what is more important here is that the second spell, if it will be triggered frequently enough, will also generate power charges for discharge. This will be another trigger event, another another power charging generating event for generating power charges to discharge. Basically, you will do 1 melee hit via Cyclone, 1 discharge hit via discharge being triggered, and 1 arc hit via arc being triggered by custom critical strike if your critical strike chance, base melee critical strike chance, is high enough. Which means for each discharge you will have at least 3 events that will generate power charges for it, for each discharge. This is really important. And now if you combine this with this 25% for each of those events to generate up to maximum power charges instead, and if you combine that with this guy here, 30% chance to not remove power charges for discharge, you will be creating a very good chance for each discharge to go at full power charges. So that's that. What is also interesting here in this kind of setup is that Mjolnir and Custom Critical Strike do have separate cooldowns. In many cases before, when I was designing a different Mjolnir builds, the main issue here was damage. Reaching high enough damage with discharge alone is really hard to do now. You can do custom crit clear full, let's say, custom critical strike with discharge only, and you will be able to reach, I don't know, 1.6 up to 2 million DPS, depending on the gear level. However, when you want to do Mjolnir, all I was able to reach was about 800 to 900k. Doesn't matter what kind of ascendancy I was trying to go, what kind of gear setup I was trying to go. I was hitting a wall at about 900k when I was trying to do a decent damage Mjolnir build with discharge only. Now, of course, we can socket arc here and have 2 spells in Mjolnir, but then there is an issue of creating enough hit events to fire those both spells at decent trigger rate. So basically each spell can be triggered up to 7.5 times per second if you add a cooldown recovery item like this belt, and 14% is enough to reach this mark. So in order to cast those 2 spells at this rate, 7.5 times per second for each, you need to generate 15 hits per second, which with most Mjolnir builds it's really impossible to do. The closest one was Juggernaut with his ascendancy adding to attack speed, and with Juggernaut and some special items boosting our attack speed with Blood Rage, with Onslaught and so on, I was able to reach up to 10, maybe 11 APS for Cyclone and Max, which is still not enough to cast both spells at 7.5 times per second. So what this setup allows is to use a more forgiving APS, let's say at about 7 to 7.5, and still be able to cast both spells 7 or higher up to 7.5 times per second. And this is the most important thing. So if you do the math, you will quickly realize that with this kind of setup you are able to deliver well over 2 million DPS to a Shaper. At this point, someone might ask, why don't go Cospri Malice? Because Cospri Malice instead of Mjolnir will be a, let's say, easier choice. Well, first of all, you won't have that crazy strength requirements with Cospri Malice, and you won't have to invest in attack speed and in critical strike chance, melee critical strike chance, as much as you have to with Mjolnir. Because Cospri has about 5.5, I believe, base critical strike chance, and 1.7 to 1.8 something base attack speed. Yeah, it will be easier, you will save some points, however, you will lose a few things, and the most important two of them are 100 10% increase spell damage if triggered for Mjolnir, which will work for discharge only, but this is the most important spell that you are triggering here in this build. And what is more important, and it's not maybe as clean to the naked eye as it might be, is that with Cospris you will lose also number of triggers per second, because Mjolnir will trigger discharge for each melee hit, doesn't matter if it is critical strike or not, while Cospris will only trigger if it is a critical strike. So that's that. And well, it will be no longer a Mjolnir build if you use Cospris. It will be just a pure another custom creed. Okay, so a full space bin is in the description for this exact build. As I mentioned it at the beginning of the video, it's still work in progress. It still needs some testing versus various bosses in the end game, and especially in new Atlas end game. However, so far so good, and I'm especially happy with the damage output finally. So if you have a standard character that can be respected into this build, you have gear lying around, or you are just willing to try it out in the template, please do, and give me some info, what you think about it in the comments. So thanks for watching, good luck and have fun!
Are equal.
Need a moment to catch my breath.
I've missed this.